Good morning, everybody. If I could get your attention so we can start the meeting. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to meeting 9 of the Planning and Housing Committee. Welcoming members and welcoming members of the public. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the September 17, 2019 meeting? Councillor Wong-Tam, all those in favor? That carries. Okay, let's run through the agenda now. And item 9.1, proposed revisions to the Provincial Policy Statement Preliminary City Comments. Councillor Perks has questions. 9.2, Growth Plan and Municipal Comprehensive Review, Conformity Exercise Requirements. I do have a motion. Do you want to move it as, do you want to look, why don't I circulate the motion in advance and then if there's any questions? Yep, okay. 9.3, Temporary Sign Bylaw Review. We have speakers. And 9.4, focusing on building design improvements. We have speakers. And if I could indulge the committee to add 2 new items. One is developing a Toronto Laneway strategy. The other one is live music venues. And the other one is affordable housing opportunities. 3 items to be added to the agenda. All those in favor? Yes. Moving that. You're moving that? Councillor Fletcher, thank you. All those in favor? That carries. It's now.
May I say, Madam Chair, Ms. Bimbakis is just going over this to make sure I've got the exact right wording for the motion.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's start then with item 9.1, proposed revisions to the Provincial Policy Statement Preliminary City Comments. I had asked staff to give us a brief overview if the committee was wanted, because I thought some of these need. Yeah, yes, that's what I thought too. So I had asked them to run us through the recommendations. Okay. Mark, are you going to do it? Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. So you may know that the province released in July of 22nd of this year the new PPS, or proposed PPS language. They posted it for a 90-day posting period with comments due on October 21st. The majority of the changes proposed by the province are intended to support their new policy framework called More Homes, More Choices plan, with a focus on 3 key areas: increasing housing supply, supporting jobs, and streamlining development approvals. The changes were also intended to provide for conformity with the growth plan, which was approved earlier this year. The staff report before you makes 11 recommendations, and I'll quickly run through those for you. The first is basically that we support the policy-led system that the province has in place and the general framework that leads to. The second is that because of the changes being made to market, housing, and other aspects as set out in the report, we want to make sure that nothing in the PPS hinders or precludes the ability for the 3 levels of government to deliver on their housing initiatives. The third is obviously that we want to provide for the inclusionary zoning in areas other than the MTSA. This is not specific to the PPS, but rather to the legislation, but it is something that Council has made recommendations on previously. Fourth recommendation is with respect to conversions of employment lands. The PPS is trying to align its policy framework with respect to employment land conversions ahead of the municipal comprehensive review, and there is new policies in the PPS to do so. So this is in keeping with previous council direction with respect to this particular issue. The PPS language has become less regulatory and more permissive, and there's a number of examples where they've gone from from shall to should, and we've identified that we should be changing those back to be more aligned with the city's policy frameworks in the official plan. One of the biggest issues that's been raised and been raised more broadly by other municipalities as well is this whole change to market need and market-based assessments for the purpose of determining a mix and range of housing types. And we're suggesting that the province look more closely at what the implications of changing to that framework would be in moving forward. And if they don't remove it, that they look at potential definitions or defining what those terms mean for the purpose of moving forward in the implementation of that policy framework. As part of the recommendation number 7 is respect to the land needs methodology. As part of the growth plan changes, the province has identified they'll be establishing a new land needs methodology framework for determining forecasts for within the city. That document has not yet been released, so we're advising that that document should be released. We make recommendations with respect to air rights policies, as they've added new air rights policies as relates to transit corridors, and trying to flag the need to be thinking about safety of rail corridors as part of that consideration. We've also added in a recommendation with respect to inconsistencies of definitions between all the provincial policy documents to make sure they're aligned. And the last is we've asked them to put in place the tool of zoning with conditions to allow us to meet the shorter timelines as set out in the new Planning Act, and also to provide for implementing the new PPS policy framework. We intend to provide comments prior to the October 21st deadline on the ERO posting, and we're asking Council to allow us to submit this report in that basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perks?
Boy, where to start? Could you give me some examples of where they've changed shall to should? Like, what are the key ones? What's at risk here?
So in recommendation 5, you'll see that we've identified 3 locations specifically where they've changed the shall to should. The first relates to built form, and this relates to the compact form and range and mix of housing types as set out. And they've gone from shall provide to should provide, providing some of that flexibility. The second is in 1137 relating to phasing. And this is where the idea of integrated or phasing plans being done as part of any development, again gone from should to shall. And with respect to transportation infrastructure, it used to be that you shall undertake transportation analysis, but now it's a should undertake transportation analysis.
And through the chair, perhaps I can add one key example, and I'll cite transportation systems, to which Mark spoke of. Currently, it says efficient use shall be made of existing and planned infrastructure, and it goes on. Now the language is proposed to change to efficient use should be made of existing and planned infrastructure. So it's a softening of the language in the PPS.
Maybe something to let them get away with the Ontario line.
And I would just add to that, to those comments that, through the chair, that, you know, what we're seeing here is a bit of the pendulum swing in terms of the directiveness of the language, where moving to should brings more into debate or negotiation or interpretation, so that we at the city may have definitive wording in our official plan, for example, about something, and we will recommend something in accordance with that. And if it's objected to and we end up at an LPAT hearing, the PPS language as should may be drawn upon by someone in opposition to our position as something to give weight to a more interpretive, you know, outcome than we might otherwise prefer in a more directive outcome from our official plan.
Okay. And this market-based, market demand thing, if I understand it, what they've done is just throw in some language saying planning will have some consideration for market demand. What market? Like the financial market? I mean, you know, the speculators have to make money? I'm not...
Well, I might comment generally, and then maybe staff can supplement, but my sense is that planning is already evaluating public policy against private interests or market interests. It's the nature of what we do. So we always see, for example, maybe a market response might be we want to sell all one-bedrooms in our condominium building. And our policy framework says, fine, but we need some 2s and 3-bedrooms. So that's a kind of a balance that we typically strike with what might otherwise be a purely market-driven approach.
So I guess the thing I'm concerned about here, let's suppose that we have designated an area as stable neighborhood, and we have some enforced zoning about that, and someone comes along and says, I can only make money if I demolish this block and build 6-story buildings here. Is that an example of them being able to argue market?
Well, that might be a market-driven ask. I would think that in that situation, we have a pretty definitive official plan policy that would be utilized to object to something like that. I don't know if staff want to comment further on the councillor's investigation of what is meant by inserting these words.
Through the chair, part of our difficulty is that the province hasn't provided definitions with respect to it. So our concern remains if we're dealing with a condominium development, let's say, where we want to see a mix of unit sizes and types. If the market is demanding that they can sell all 1-bedroom or junior 1-bedrooms, that's the market. That's a concern to us because in terms of providing complete communities, we want to see a broad range of housing types within both developments and within communities.
Sorry to belabor this, if I could just one more, yeah? So I appreciate that that's an example. I'm concerned about other examples. So, I gave one. Currently, we say in this zone no more than 4 stories. Could someone come forward with something saying, no, we want to flatten all this block and make it 8 stories. We bought up the land, we're block busting, away we go. There's a market case for it. And I appreciate that they haven't provided clarifying language. I guess the part B of my question is, does that just leave it in the hands of members of the LPAT to decide what that means?
I think the example that is being used is somewhat extreme. It does introduce market as something that may be given more weight than it otherwise is now because of its inclusion in the actual policy framework of the PPS. So it could be something that is deployed as part of their case, especially if the city were opposed and had extremely definitive language, as we do, around the example of we have 4-story language in our official plan. So it's pretty tight.
And on the part B, if the province doesn't define it, it just leaves it in the hands of members of the LPAT to figure out what it means.
It would be up to the provincially appointed LPAT, yes.
Questions? Chair.
That was going to be my last one, but thank you for answering that. Under the shall to should, it really indicates that things that we may require or should be required around climate change are now being moved to a shall. So we're negotiating that's one of the implications of shall to should. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Through the chair. So generally throughout the document, there is a change from regulatory language to more permissive and policy-based language, and that shall to should is part of that change. The intent is to provide that flexibility throughout the document, and definitely it would end up in us having to make and have arguments on those particular elements when interpreting the policy.
Well, I guess I'm just asking with the climate change lens, where would that hinder us from getting something with a should and it being moved to a shall?
So there are no changes through the chair. There was no changes to the PPS with respect to climate change from a shall to a should and regulatory language. However, there are proposed changes to the climate change framework in the way of the definition with respect to the changing climate and the overall framework. We have identified, and other municipalities have identified, that the climate change adaptation is not properly addressed in the new PPS, just mitigation as part of the new changes.
So that's a pretty big deal, isn't it, if there's no adaptation?
Through the chair, that's the general thrust increasingly of the city in the Transform TO plan is to move toward more an adapted response to climate change. Mitigation is a shorter-term lens, which the city is moving away from.
Nonetheless, that now may hinder that ability to be.
Through the
Or is
chair,
that a bit
perhaps
harder?
I can elaborate. Our second report, which is on the growth plan, one of the changes that we do have to address as we do our next MCR and review of the OP is climate change policies with respect to environmental, and it is a must reduce greenhouse gases and other matters. So it will be addressed through the OP, through the growth, response on the growth plan.
I guess I'm just saying that if they're changing that, that makes it harder for us to be very clear. Whoops, sorry about that. It says right here, the unknown implications of climate change, that the effective policy play a role in it. As we, the shift to encouraging language away from mandatory requirement language is concerning, coupled with the recent LPAT reforms as the city grapples with financial challenges and the unknown implications of climate change. So I guess that should concern us, that it's a shall. I mean, a shall rather than should, because that's an OM and LPAT special where you get to go in and argue now,
Yeah.
rather than it being prescribed.
I think through the chair, you're pointing out, Councillor, the general concern with moving areas of
Critical.
policy direction of the City of Toronto into more of an interpretive frame, less directive, which for projects that is complying with everything, we're good, but if a project is not, then we've got more of a debate on our hands.
Right. And since we have declared a climate emergency, then this is pretty big. I just wondered which stations are currently being looked at for the major transit station area planning, where you're expecting that would be, inclusionary zoning would be part of that. How many are there?
Through the chair, there are 163 MTSAs within the City of Toronto.
Have we ever had a complete report just on MTSAs? Can you remind me?
Through the chair, the second report that's on the agenda is our preliminary report setting out what we will have to do, and we'll be reporting out the first quarter of 2020 on a detailed work plan with respect to our growth plan conformity, which will include the MTSA work.
But have we seen where the 163 stations are? Is there a list?
Through the, yes, we do have those, and I'd be happy to share them with members of committee. I just don't have the map with me
So
right
maybe
now.
when we get to item 2, I can ask that they be forwarded to
Yes.
council as well. So I'll wait till item 2 then.
Yeah, and we do have a map that we can show.
I want more than the map, so you'll know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. Through the chair, just a couple quick questions. When I look at recommendation 6, all the way up on Councillor Perk's questions, the draft PPS changes are speaking a lot around market-based need and market-based demand. Obviously, development in the city always takes place in partnership and support with development partners, depending on the projects. Why do you think the province is going to this effort to introduce that language now for something that has obviously been taking place here for many years?
I think it would be speculation on my part, through the chair, to answer that question, other than a belief that more of a supply-driven response is what's needed to our housing challenges. And we have outlined in the report, for example, that we have significant supply already approved
Right.
here at the city, yet we still have rising land value and rising housing prices. So we're not convinced that supply is going to address our pricing challenges nor our affordability challenges, that we have previously advised council of that and will continue to advise council of that in the HOT plan, that we need a toolkit approach to the housing challenge, including direct government support for providing affordable housing, which clearly the market won't provide unless it is done through public policy or direct government program.
So let me just put it another way. If this is all a conformity test and we need to align with the PPS, how would the introduction of that language, market-based need and market-based demand, change our policy approach here in city planning?
I don't believe it will change our policy approach, but it is potentially problematic if something goes to wait at an adjudicated process where the other side might be arguing that we have to approve an additional amount of density, for example, just on its face, which otherwise is not appropriate.
Right.
Because the supply of housing alone will rectify the housing challenge.
Picking up on that, this will be my last question. The report explicitly goes over and over that we need more from our planning process than just additional housing supply. We need a planning process that is going to deliver the infrastructure and services to support that growth in our communities. Is there anything in the proposed PPS changes that's actually going to strengthen the city's ability to get more facilities and services to support that growth that they want us to take on?
Off the top, I'm not aware of anything in the PPS. We certainly know from the growth plan that, we support intensification, but we also support infrastructure. You have to grow both if you want livability. That's the simple equation. So we're certainly interested in where we can make those linkages, and we have done that through various official plan amendments that we've done here at the city, but I'm getting no nods from staff about
It's,
definitive changes.
it seems like it's speaking much more to the need to accommodate and bring on more growth, but not necessarily spending the same amount of time and language on how we secure the infrastructure and facilities to support that.
Through the chair, that would be correct.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Growth plan for development.
I do have a couple. Just wondering if we've been talking with other municipalities about some of these comments?
Through the chair, that's correct. There is a group of upper-tier and single-tier municipalities where we do come together, and we've shared our commentary with respect to our concerns, and most of our concerns are aligned, although some of the outer ring municipalities have more concerns with the policies around aggregates and settlement areas, but market-based, the planning timelines about planning process, those are all shared collectively by other municipalities.
Great. So one of the things that was claimed to be a goal of this bill was some certainty, and it feels like that's the last thing we have is some certainty. So in your opinion, when can we start expecting some certainty on what's happening? What are the next milestones kind of thing that this committee and people in the city can expect on this bill?
Through the chair, the province will take the comments back from both the private sector, public sector, will determine what, if anything, they will modify with respect to the PPS, and then they will release a final PPS document, which then we're all required to bring our plans, planning decisions have to be consistent with. So it's a bit of an unknown right now in terms of what the province will or will not change.
Okay, but are we, do we have a working table with the province? I mean, how is staff working with staff at the ministry?
So the province has held, as they have in the past with some of the other tables, consultations. We've not had any recent consultations with the province. They're at this point in time waiting for feedback from all parties who choose to comment on it. We'll hope that we'll have some consultation afterwards, but there is no commitment at the on the point of the province to come back with any changes. They may just simply introduce the final update to the PPS.
Thank you. Okay, speakers? Yeah, that's exactly the feeling. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. To the chair, I'd like to thank staff for their work on all of this. You know, it's interesting to me when we read this report and the recommendations, the province is very focused on speeding up the planning process, but we do spend a lot of our time and our resources responding to these sort of comments and new policy directions. So as we were discussing, it seems like there's kind of a number of contradictions embedded in the updates to the PPS. So on one hand, you know, we're wanting to increase housing supply. We are very much the approach is very much embedded in the market and dependent on the market on delivering that. But at the same time, we're also very much restricting tools like inclusionary zoning specifically to the MTSAs rather than citywide, where that is really our best opportunity to secure and introduce affordable housing. So, you know, more housing, more supply, you know, implied more affordability, and yet the most important tool for us to actually deliver that is very much restricted. It's kind of contradictory in the fact that they emphasize and want to support job growth in the province, but we're undercutting our employment use policies in our employment lands. We're weakening the protections around that, which historically has been a real battle and a challenge in Toronto, and something that we have to very much be in line with protecting. And so this makes that more challenging. And then again, finally, you know, they're very focused on streamlining the planning and approval process. We now live in a world where we have 3 simultaneous tribunals, leading to further delays, and we also have language, which we discuss a lot, from shall, should, shall. And that actually, if you talk to anyone on the industry side, what they want is clarity. And we've actually undermined that clarity now. So everything is open to interpretation, everything is open to discussion, and you know, I suspect will largely result in more applications ending up in a tribunal situation. So I get the policy objectives and the aims, but again, what we see from the provincial government here are a lot of changes that I think inherently will undermine our ability as a city of Toronto, city planning, and our communities to deliver on those key files. So lots of work. I appreciate the comments from staff. They're very thoughtful, and looking forward to hearing what comes back from the province. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Nope. Seeing none. Seeing none, I just want to add my thanks to staff for the work being done here. I think it is really important also that we are speaking with other municipalities and making sure that we have a consistent position. I think that that will strengthen our position going to the province. So I think that's really important work. So thank you for that. You know, as I was saying in my questioning, people talk about certainty because we need certainty to build more housing, and all I hear from, even from people from the industry, is that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty on what's going to come up with the bill. There's a lot of uncertainty on what is happening next. And so I'm looking forward to see what actually at the end of the day, when all this is done, we're going to be able to do in terms of this bill, and if it's actually going to translate into revenue neutrality and actually building the housing that we need in here, but above all, building good communities for a healthy city. So I think that there's a lot of frustration that we have in here around council just because of all the uncertainty that we have. But again, thanks staff for dealing with all that. I'm sure that you're just as frustrated because we go to you to ask for answers that you don't have on a very, very regular basis. So thanks for all your work. Okay, seeing that, can I get a motion to move that? Councillor Perks, all those in favor? That carries. Okay, item 9.2. Growth Plan and Municipal Comprehensive Review, Conformity Exercise Requirements. Any speakers? We don't have anybody signed up. Questions of staff? Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, I was just going to ask now about the transit station planning. And forget 163, I think it was. Staff have the picture there. You'll put it up, thank you. So just while it's up there, I'm assuming it covers existing stations?
Yes, through the chair, yes, it does.
existing stations and then new stations. And what is the role of the MTSAs in establishing a station, in a preferred station or a preferred location? Is that a lens that's used at all?
So through the chair,
Let's wait till we get them up there, because there's a lot of them. Geez, there's none of them. There we go. Quite a few.
so through the chair, the definition in the growth plan of a major transit station area are the stations generally within 500 to 800 meters of a planned or approved station. And so the lens that we're using to identify them are the ones that exist and the ones that have approved EAs.
So if it's planned or approved, that sounds like it hasn't been built yet.
Correct, but those with approved EAs are identified on our map and are included in our 163 MTSAs across the city.
So just to be clear, because I'm not sure people realize this, that all of the existing, so you've got the new line, I see Danforth in there, Bloor, Danforth, Eglinton, Finch, and then, what's that up there?
Through the chair, that's the Shepherd LRT.
The Shepherd LRT. And do you have any idea where the required density has already been met around some of those stations, or it's been pre-planned?
Through the chair, that work is ongoing, but generally in the downtown, in the Young University Spadina line, in the U, the loop, is where generally the stations that have already met or exceeded the required densities exist.
And just what is the required density per station? Or is there a formula, or
Yes.
is it, okay?
So through the chair, the required density targets for subways are 200 jobs per hectare. For LRT, light rail transit, it's 160 jobs and people and jobs per hectare, and for GO stations, it's 150 jobs and hectare. And
Is it
another area,
people and jobs, or just jobs?
residents and jobs.
Subways, 250,
No, subways 200
200.
for subways.
LRT, 160.
Correct.
And GO is?
150.
And what would we consider, here's a good question, what are we considering Smart Track and the Ontario line as?
So through the chair,
Which category is it?
so through the chair, using the lens that we've applied, the Smart Track would be considered like a GO, and in terms of the Ontario line, there's no approved EA at the moment, so it would not meet the lens to which we put it on our map.
I'm sorry, it would not meet the lens?
Wait, I think Jeff's saying that until we have an approved line, he can't answer that question. I think if you look back to the relief line south, which was an approved EA, you would see it through the subway density lens, so 200 people and
Right.
jobs.
And knowing, I don't want to blow us off course here, but this is the first time, what?
Nothing. I feel those winds.
Planning, schmanning.
Sorry.
If you feel a breeze. I think it's important, because we're teeing this up, but which stations have already met that? So I know for the relief line, when we were looking at the stations, the Leslieville station at Queen and Carlaw technically, basically had met any of the major station requirements.
Through the chair, I think you will see that many do, and we need that analysis, and we are actually in the process of undertaking that analysis. We will be able to tell you that in the first quarter report in 2020. If I were betting, I would say we're halfway home already, easily, with densities that have already been approved in these MTSAs, and we will have to then prioritize ones where we feel we have not met those densities, and consider other factors such as local context, opportunities for change in these local areas.
Then the other thing is for the waterfront LRT. Thank you. Some areas have met the density targets, but they don't have any rapid transit. Would you be identifying that? So probably the waterfront LRT is well met, the density targets that would be required for major transit station.
Yes,
But there is no transit.
Again, through the chair, we'll be looking for the approved test to be met. If there's an approved EA for the waterfront line, the waterfront reset report that council adopted and the status of those component parts, I'd have to refresh my memory
that's
on
fine.
which ones were approved and not approved yet, but certainly we'll be looking through that to be more specific about those station locations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perks?
So if I'm reading this right, you're asking us for a direction to bring a report in the first quarter of next year, which will have your work plan.
Yes, we through the chair, we were getting a lot of questions from the public and members of council.
Yes.
And staff as we prepared the hot plan, for example, about what all of this means.
Yes.
And honestly, it's challenging, as the committee already understands, as the province has approved the growth plan amendment in the spring and is considering a further amendment, actually, to the growth plan to possibly tweak, for example, the PZs. So we wanted to give council an understanding of what we thought our work plan would be without being able to tell you exactly what it is yet because of the amount of work required to give you a fulsome picture of that. We are also at a very sensitive time because we are just completing the OPA 231 hearing, which is the previous employment lands hearing dating back to December 2013 and council's approval of employment lands policies. So we are telling you what we can tell you in that context right now. We present final arguments next week, so we're telling you what we can tell you in public right now.
I just realized the question I was leading to might be an in-camera question. That's what I've just...
We had discussed that. We might need to, yeah, if you guys...
You know what, instead of wasting the committee's time, well, no, going in and out of camera. I mean, I have some concerns about, we have a law passed, we don't have policy to support it, and applications that come in the meanwhile, and where do they sit? So maybe can we put this to the end of the agenda, because I do want to...
A lot of us have that challenge.
Can we put this to the end of the agenda to go in camera? Like, I want to understand this. Is that fair?
We can go in camp, would you check with Brian? Yes. Okay, thank you.
We can, thanks.
Yeah, we were
Okay,
expecting
thank
this, yeah, that's...
That's a good question.
Okay, so we'll stem this one and we'll go to temporary...
Challenge.
9.3, temporary sign bylaw review, and we have speakers. Mauro Ricata.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Brian Torrey. I'm a director at the Toronto Real Estate Board, and I'm also the chair of the board's Government Relations Committee. On behalf of the 55,000 members of the Toronto Real Estate Board, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to provide our views. It's been a pleasure to work cooperatively with city staff to provide input on this issue. In that regard, TREB fully supports the recommendations regarding real estate open house signs, and we believe that the proposed changes will help to ensure the appropriate use of these signs. With that said, I would like to emphasize that TREB understands the challenges faced by the city with regard to the use of open house signs, and I want to stress that TREB stands ready to work with the City Hall in addressing these issues cooperatively. We have a strong mandate from the vast majority of our members who strive to comply with sign bylaws to deal with the small minority of members who choose to abuse these bylaws. In short, we are just as keen to work with you to deal with those that are taking advantage of the rules, and we want to fix this. It is for this reason that TREB has recently implemented a stricter process for disciplining members who are reported to us for contravening municipal bylaws, in addition to City Hall's current sign bylaw enforcement regime. As part of this process, if a member is found to have contravened the sign bylaw, they will be subjected to TREB's professional standards disciplinary process with a range of measures from fines to revoking memberships. Furthermore, as part of this process, we will be reporting members whom we receive complaints about to the City to aid your enforcement. Lastly, we will be publishing examples of the implementation of these disciplinary measures to all TREB members so that they are aware of the consequences of abusing municipal sign bylaws. This is in addition to the frequent communications that we regularly distribute to our members, strongly emphasizing the importance of complying with municipal bylaws. With that in mind, I would also like to stress that TREB supports stronger enforcement by the City, including beefing up the current fine structure. We would be happy to work with you on ways to do this. I'd like to end by providing some background and data on the use of open house signs and the legitimate role that they play when used appropriately. Although they are one of the oldest tools used by realtors, open house signs continue to be an important and legitimate marketing tool that home sellers expect and demand to be part of the strategies used to promote the sale of their property and that home buyers appreciate when house hunting. In this regard, I'm happy to share with you the results of polling conducted by Ipsos Public Affairs in the first 2 weeks of August 2019. The results were as follows. 90% of Torontonians support the use of open house signs on public property, subject to limitations regulating things like location, time of day, and size. 84% of Torontonians expect their realtor to host an open house when marketing a property for sale. 88% expect open house signs to be used in marketing an open house for their property. And fewer than 2 in 10 Torontonians agree with the statement that open house signs are an eyesore and should not be allowed. These poll results demonstrate that Torontonians understand the importance of open house signs. I hope our views have been helpful. Thank you again for this opportunity, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Did you do any work, thank you for that, and it's nice to hear that your organization is working with the city. Did you do any work around condominium signs?
Open house signs for condominiums?
Yeah, those specifically. Like, I understand if there's a single property somewhere, you know, open house today, a single sign, that I think we can find peace about that. It's the signs that are of more concern, I think, are, you know, an entire neighborhood having a bunch of signs saying condominiums 10 blocks that way.
I know there's a lot of condominiums that don't allow open house signs on their own property, but as far as doing an open house...
There's an irony there.
Yeah, well, there you go. And as far as doing signage for an open house, the city bylaws would be respected the same way it would be for a freehold. So an agent, a salesperson would be allowed to put out their signs directing them to the condominium itself for the open house.
You didn't do any internal work asking questions of your members more specifically on that than just an individual property, individual home?
No, not specific to condos, but it's actually not a bad idea. Maybe
Because there is a difference in the...
right. Maybe we should go back to the field and delve deeper into that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have a couple. So that's great that you have a new process in place. Is it already, has it started already?
It has.
And so can you go a little bit more in detail of how exactly you're proposing to impose these fines and to revoke the membership?
Revoking the membership would just be one of the options available to the Professional Standards Committee. The way that the process would work is that if a member of our board issues a complaint against another member, there's a process in place where the complaint can be done quite easily online, where an email is sent in.
It has to be a member of your organization to complain to another member? Like, we can't complain?
No, a member of the public can complain.
Could complain also.
Okay.
Yeah. From there, what happens is our internal processes look at the complaint and then deal with it in that sense through the Professional Standards Committee. At which point there can be any result from a fine issued for further and repeat offenders to more serious ramifications.
Okay. And how are you promoting that anybody can actually complain to you, and how do they do it? What number do they contact? How is this? Are you going to be promoting it to us, all the councillors? Are you starting a campaign out there?
Yeah, on that particular issue, now we're focused on the 55,000 members. So we do it by direct e-blast to the membership. We have our MLS system where we publish that. We haven't done a campaign to the public per se. You know, it's a tough one where City Hall has its MLS, its municipal license and standards. And so to the extent where our ability to go out to the public, that's usually our members that deal directly with their clients. So TREB doesn't necessarily run those direct campaigns to the public.
But at least can 311, can MLS and us be informed on how we can let you know how annoying and unprofessional some of your members, very minority, but how bad they are?
Yeah, one of the things we can do, Councillor, is we should reach out to city staff to say, because we actually just convinced our board to approve a process where if we get complaints, we actually think that it should be a two-way street. We should also inform City Hall and vice versa. So maybe what we need to do is put in place a structure where we can sort of communicate with you guys and you guys can let us know as well, all right? If you have any complaints directly that you want TREB to pursue. We're focused on believe it or not, we actually get a lot of complaints from the bad apples. We got a lot of complaints from other members. It's not even the public. Members are not happy with members who break the bylaw.
Great, thank you. Linda Brett.
Thank you.
Is it okay to put this down? Thank you.
Good morning, Linda. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Linda Brett. I'm here this morning on behalf of the Bloor Street East Neighborhood Association. And a disclaimer, the work that was done by this was done by a member of BINA, John Burt, who's away at the moment. So I've taken on the job of deputing to you, although I didn't attend all the meetings. John did write an email, which you should have in your package, that was forwarded from the BINA account with respect to his comments. Further discussions with him and reading of the other reports, etc., I'm actually going to recommend a possible general amendment with respect to the safety issues of placement of signs near the curb, etc., that they be required to ensure the placement of the sign is safe with respect to weather conditions and snow, wind, etc., and that the owner of the sign is legally responsible for any damage to the property or personal injury caused by the temporary sign. This may be totally offline. This is just off the top of my head. So this is a concern similar to the other associations in the wind factor and also winter snow conditions. So other additional concerns that relate to unauthorized movement of signs, we also have additional concerns related to the unauthorized movement of signs of members of the public. We have a problem in our neighborhood where we have someone who is a street person who regularly moves temporary signs out into the street, other parts of the sidewalk. And if they're left overnight, we often find them the next morning in the middle of Bloor Street. So other key concerns relating to implementation is the education factor, and you've heard parts of it from the previous deputants. And I think that's industry as well as the general public. I tried in the last couple of days to read these amendments and read the other side bylaw, and by the time I read everything that relates to all the signs, I'm totally confused. I walked down Church Street from Bloor to Gloucester on Saturday, and the proliferation of signs was enormous, as probably Councillor Wong-Tam will attest to. And as to what sign bylaw would relate to each and every one of them, I could not identify other than a few of them. So I find that a problem. If I were to try and report to 311, I would have no idea what the violation is. So that's what gets to enforcement, looking for active enforcement, not simply complaint driven. Again, that's looking at Church Street and looking at the proliferation of signs. I think it really takes active enforcement of somebody who actually knows all of the bylaws to look at it and write up any of the actions required. Finally, and this comes from John, is staff coordination. 311 to staff enforcement officers. He regularly, and I'm going to put this up here. These are our boundaries. We go from Yonge Street to Sherbourne. And John, on a regular basis, walks our area and goes home and writes up all of the 311s. And it can take him up to 2 hours to write up all the 311s as he walks all of our street. Afterwards, he's found, he will send a photo of the infraction, and photos get stripped. Sometimes they call him at 7 o'clock in the morning, which he doesn't appreciate a call at 7 o'clock in the morning. Various other issues. And I know that they're looking at doing some work on 311 and the actual system itself, and it would be helpful perhaps if members of the public have an opportunity to discuss some of the issues that they have with 311. Okay, I'm going to just finish with a personal comment, and it does not necessarily relate to signs themselves, but it relates to the amount of the sidewalks that are now, especially the curb area that's being taken up by both signs and street furniture, etc. That area is generally the area that is the most level. I myself and a friend of mine that has polio have a very difficult time walking on slanted streets. And some of our sidewalks are very slanted until you get to where you're putting the street furniture, etc. So it's becoming more and more of a problem being able to walk on some of our sidewalks. Our new sidewalk designs, when you're designing them, most of them have a flatter area. But when you're putting street furniture and signs on sidewalks that have been around for a long time, it can become a challenge. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputy? Seeing none, thank you for...
one last picture I forgot. It's a picture...
Sorry, your 5 minutes are up, so
Okay, I'm
thank
just going to
you.
put it up. You can look at it. That's from Japan.
Great. Thank you so much. And next, we have Gordon Brown. Good morning, Gordon. 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and I hope everyone enjoyed their long weekend as much as I did. I'm here on behalf of the Harbour Village Residents Association, a volunteer organization representing the area from Bloor to College and Spadina to Bathurst. We're active in all areas of urban life and planning, with particular interest in public spaces, accessibility, and safe streets. And with 3 requests for committee consideration, this is to express our strong support for the recommendations arising from the temporary sign bylaw review. I'll start off by posing a question, which is, what's wrong with this picture? With low-rise residential streets and mixed-use main streets in our area, we understand the challenges of balancing business and public interests in public space. And we congratulate staff, in particular Dylan Feist, for the excellent job they have done in making sidewalk accessibility a priority, while allowing commercial advertising interests to coexist as a privilege, but one that has responsibilities. Consistent with what you have heard or read in other submissions, A-frame signs are an obvious concern for us, turning our main streets into obstacle courses. So we're particularly happy with the recommendations in the report, which will significantly improve this situation by discouraging sidewalk obstruction of illegally placed frames, sign bylaw enforcement, removal of illegal signs, decluttering the promised pedestrian clearway by requiring A-frame signs to be located in the curbside tree and furnishing zone where a zone exists, and allowing A-frames to be licensed to building phase only where there is no such provision and the pedestrian clearway is provided. However, the bylaw is silent on how the pedestrian clearway allowance is measured with respect to the roadway in the case of storefront A-frame signs. To address this, we request that the bylaw be modified such that storefront A-frame signs require 2.4 meters from the back face of the curb, which will give pedestrians the clearway and the edge zone, which, as Bina has indicated, is used for snow storage, car access, egress, and the other thing. It's a clarification that will ensure that pedestrians have both the clearway and the buffering edge zone. Okay, our second request has to do with enforcement, which is a big issue, as we've seen before and others have mentioned. In the proposed bylaw, we're pleased to see that permit application, license renewal, and associated enforcement fees are based on full cost recovery, as they should be for this business privilege. To address these residual concerns and in support of Toronto's commitment to a barrier-free city, our second request is that A-frame sign fees be increased to cover the cost of whatever incremental resources are required to increase the MLS enforcement pool to ensure that Main Street pedestrian clearways are accessible 7 days a week. This is particularly important because weekends are the time when people are out walking, dining, shopping. It's also the time when new development signs tend to proliferate. So we're looking for 7-day-a-week enforcement, as happens in the very pedestrian-friendly city of Philadelphia. Finally, in addition to accessibility considerations, we support the inclusion of home builder identification, contracted services, and advocacy signs in the temporary signs bylaw, and we applaud staff for the way in which they have balanced commercial and residential interests in the number, location, size, and required condition of such signs, as well as the required expiry date. Our only concern is with the recommended size for advocacy signs, which staff indicate is based on the largest election sign of 1.2 square meters, which is about 3 feet by 4 feet. We understand why they did that. I mean, you're advocating for a candidate, you're advocating for a particular position. However, as discussed with staff, and they were very open to the thoughts, election signs are up for a few weeks, advocacy signs could be up forever. And such a large sign is more akin to shouting at our neighbors than sharing our ideas. With that, our third and final request is that the recommendation 16E be modified to request that advocacy signs be the same size as the most common plastic signs, which is 0.25 square meters or about 16 by 24. In closing, we congratulate staff on an outstanding report that they have presented. We applaud them for putting pedestrian safety and accessibility up front in their considerations and for what we feel are very effective consultations. And we ask you to please strongly support the recommendations with the 3 considerations that we have offered. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Seeing none, next Deputant Sarah Doucette. Who? I know.
This is nerve-wracking. Before I start, I do have a copy of what I'm going to say, which I will give to clerks, so you don't have to write lots and lots of notes. All right. Hang on, I've got to get my pictures ready. You know me, I like pictures. Okay, so I'd like to start by thanking staff, particularly Dylan Feist. I found out 3 days before the consultation deadline that this report, including the 2 members' bit motions that I was a part of in 2017 and July 2018, regarding the anti-abortion graphic signs were going to be included in this report. I therefore put it out on social media, informing residents that if they had comments to please send them in by the deadline. You then received over 800 emails. I'd be interested to know how many emails you did receive regarding the advocacy signs and the A-frames. As a city councillor in my 8 years, this was a topic we received the most communications about. Each spring when the signs started appearing, we heard from hundreds of upset residents, not just from my ward, but from across the city. They wanted to know what the city was doing to remove these signs from city property. I have blanked out the graphic images because I don't believe we should be imposed with them unless you agree. People holding the signs are not just on our street corners and our local shopping communities, but they're outside high schools. some which have daycares, recreation centers, universities, colleges, all places where children and youth will be. They stand there so you cannot avoid but seeing the images, and often they are blocking our sidewalks. They also have large banners. This is actually a small one which they started with, which they hold up attached to the back of 3 chairs, often on Lakeshore, right near Sunnyside Swimming Pool, another place where families go. These banners are sightline obstructions and distractions for drivers. They are dangerous. The comments I have heard from residents, and I will tell you what I have heard. These signs are very disturbing for men, women, and children. They are designed to shock, alarm, and cause dismay to those who have no choice but to be exposed to them. They are particularly stressful for women who are pregnant or have lost a baby during pregnancy. Children are traumatized by the blood and gore and have nightmares. Parents find it difficult to explain these images to young children. These images are not accurate for the week they are supposed to be depicting. They are false advertising. Why are these allowed to be shown when movies have to be rated, and these signs are just in your faces and you have no choice but to see them? When a report is coming to television or radio, there is always a warning about the graphic or disturbing nature of the report. People then have a choice whether you listen or watch. This is hate speech and directed against women. This is harassment, emotional abuse, public nuisance. They block the sidewalks so that you cannot get by, particularly those with disabilities and pushing strollers. The people holding the signs are aggressive, particularly the young men who hold them. Women find it very intimidating when trying to get past. People told me that the complaints were not about pro-life or pro-choice. They are about the graphic, traumatizing nature of the images being used by Canadian Centre of Bioethical Reform. I understand freedom of speech and I agree with it, but I feel that having these images in one's face, residents have no choice but to see them. If this group wants to stand on a street corner, not block the sidewalk, and engage with people and provide brochures, no problem. If people wish to speak with them and accept these brochures, which they then have the choice whether they look at the images, that is up to them. We're not looking to take away their rights to engage with people. We just want to remove the graphic signs. I also did provide to Dylan copies of emails from Joyce Arthur, Executive Director of Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada. She made some suggestions about the city using the Canadian Code of Advertising Standards, and the Toronto Hates Activity policy can also play a role. Throughout your report, you mention improving the pedestrian clearway and maintaining the existing 2.1 meter clearance and expanding it to 2.5 meters on specific streets downtown. This would provide the line of travel for pedestrians. I hope you take this into consideration when writing your policy on this sign. Could you also look into these signs needing permits, as they are encroaching into the accessibility allowance, and other temporary signs are requested to have permits? All musicians who play on our streets, they also need permits. Finally, I am happy to see the advocacy signs are included in this report, as this was an issue I brought up in 2013. I would like to say, though, that 16C may need some flexibility with your bylaw, as many residents have no idea how much of their front lawn is actually city property. As an example, I've lived in my house for over 26 years and only found out 3 years ago that the trees on my front lawn are actually city trees. And yet, I have spent thousands of dollars keeping my magnificent magnolia alive in front of my house. People travel for miles to see this magnolia and photograph it when it is flowering. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome back. I just want to ask you, with respect to the impact on the local community as they take a look at these signs. I know you sort of touched upon some of the feelings that people have. Can you elaborate further?
Oh, boy.
Do they have to redirect their routes so their children don't have to see it? Does it cause an inconvenience? Is it a visual blight? What's happening there?
So as an example, in Bloor West, you will have these giant signs, and I showed you the picture to show how big these signs are. You come out of a bank, You come out of a grocery store, and they are standing right in front of you. So if you have children with you, you have no choice but to see them. If you're walking along the sidewalk, they are often blocking the sidewalk, and you have to step around them. If you do approach them and ask them to either move or just engage with them, they can get very abusive. As a woman, I find that intimidating, and I'm pretty good with people. But when you do have young children, I heard a lot of people with children in tears from the graphic images. It looks like a baby has been cut up, and it's all blood and gore. In the package I'm giving you, I still blank them out. You can always Google them, you can see what they look like. So people just want to know, why is the city allowing these graphic signs there? That's really what it is. Children have nightmares. Women who have just lost babies or in the middle of pregnancy, very, very intimidating. It's traumatic for people.
And so you're saying that there's a responsibility at the city to make sure that this these images, this information is not publicly displayed on public sidewalks. Are you concerned about the misrepresentation and the misinformation contained in these sort of large billboards that are designed as A-frames? And are you also concerned about the fact that people can get into altercations because of the provocative material?
So yes, yes, and yes. I believe that the city has policy about what can be on city properties. Most of your report is saying what can be on city properties, where it can be, how it can be. Do they need a permit? Don't they need a permit? These are people holding signs, and when they don't move out of your way, that is an obstruction. Many of the residents will call the police, and the police say, well, what can we do? Unless they're actually harassing you, they can't get involved, but by the time they get there, usually someone has moved on and isn't prepared to wait. So I do believe that the city has a right to do something, to make policy about what is on their property. But I do want to reiterate, I personally am not saying ban them completely, just ban the big signs. If you want the copy of their brochure, as I say, you can have it. You can take it. It's your choice. What people are upset about is we don't have a choice. As I mentioned, when you go to a movie, it's got a rating. When there's something on TV or radio, there is a rating, and you are pre-warned that you may be disturbed by what you're hearing or seeing. Those signs, you have no choice. Outside daycares, outside high schools, it shouldn't be allowed, and I think we as a city need to respect freedom of choice, but we also need to protect our citizens from these graphic signs.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, questions of staff? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to just drill down a little bit deeper around the advocacy signs. As noted very articulately by former Councillor Sarah Doucette, there are some signs that just don't seem to pass the test in terms of public decency. They're provocative. They contain misinformation. Are you not, by way of creating this advocacy sign, this new category, now permitting property owners and perhaps encouraging property owners, which you don't get to you don't get to edit, you don't get to review any of the content. Signs can just literally be popping up in communities and placing that go directly on private property. Are we creating a loophole?
Advocacy signs, again, this is the one that was asked for in 2013, and they are popping up everywhere from no jets or there's been a variety of public opinion that people have chosen to use the advocacy signs. The other one is the slow down. So what we're providing for is advocacy signs, hopefully mostly positive, is one per property and on private property.
So when advocacy signs are mostly positive, I think it depends on where you sit on the positive messaging. We could also be creating a new category where there is a lot of negative messaging. So, for example, I've seen signs held by people at different events, and sometimes they've shown up on the doorsteps where they don't want to see shelters come into their neighborhood. They don't want to see accessible switchbacks along ravine trails. They don't want to see infrastructure that's built because they just don't necessarily want that particular infrastructure. They don't want to see immigrants. They don't want to see asylum seekers. They don't want to see refugees. Like, there are all sorts of ways that these advocacy signs can be abused. And I recognize that there's a desire to sort of encourage people to slow down, and that should be adopted through Vision Zero, and there's a whole host of implementation tools to that. But are we not creating a loophole for these type of signs that are perhaps not in the public interest to then be placed onto private property?
The challenge we face is who are us as a division to adjudicate what is fair, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. There's a lot of work happening in different jurisdictions, and I'm going to turn this over to my colleague in legal if she wants to talk a little bit about some of the research that she's doing with the federal government and why we still have some work to do on this piece.
Edit, Councillor?
Yes, I think there was going to get a comment from legal. Thank you.
The approach to the advocacy signs in light of the freedom of expression right that we all recognize and know exists is to reasonably regulate them. As municipal licensing standards has already indicated, they already exist, they already have been there. So this is an attempt to reasonably regulate them, and as was already mentioned, along the lines of election signs, which are similarly protected by the Charter.
Any other questions? Councillor Fletcher?
I just wanted to talk about the right-of-way part, and that you can't have these signs on city property. So that was tested a while ago because technically you can't have election signs on the right-of-way. But many homes in the older part of the city, basically that's all they have is right-of-way. And they mow that, they plant that, they look after that. So I'm wondering how you came up with that particular requirement. Would like to answer that.
The intent for the advocacy signs is for them to be on, again, private property. I understand the challenges, and we've had this discussion before on election signs in your part of the city where...
Well, it's not just my part, it's the whole old city of Toronto.
Many parts of the city.
So what we're trying to do is to balance the interests of pedestrians being able to move freely, is to limit it to private property and not to include it on the right-of-way.
Sorry, I'm unclear, because pedestrians aren't walking on your lawn, they're on the sidewalk. I think we've mixed up the right-of-way and the private property part for commercial interests vis-a-vis your home. Would that be possible?
The other piece with the right-of-way, and it's common with election signs as well, is the safety angle and the distance from the corner.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about on the property that you mow, that you garden on, that you tend the trees on, that technically belongs to the city, in front of your home.
So I'm going to ask my colleague in Transportation Services who's involved in the right-of-way to respond to that.
Through the chair, instances like that, we can enforce the signage through our encumbering or our, actually it's usually through the encumbering part of our streets bylaw, where we ask those signs to be removed, or we have the authority to remove them if they refuse.
So I don't think my questions are, maybe they're not clear or they're not well understood. There's advocacy signs that might be on the sidewalk. You're saying that's the right-of-way and they have to be on private property. We put advocacy signs, as a matter of fact, Transportation Services has advocacy signs called "Whoa, slow down, drive like your kids are here." those are on people's lawns. And great part of those lawns, probably half, belong to the city. In some cases, almost all of that lawn belongs to the city. So I'm having trouble with your one-size-fits-all right-of-way requirement here, that these advocacy signs can't be on the right-of-way, or signs can't be on the right-of-way. Did you take this part of the city into consideration in a deep enough way, or do you think you should review that?
So again, the advocacy signs they can be on that property for the entire year. It's not like an election sign, which is, 30 days. So we did consider it. It is a difficult.
They can be on that property, but not the right-of-way.
On the private property, that's correct.
So I'm going to have to ask, Chair, that we clarify the right-of-way versus private property for parts of the city that basically, that's all you have, is right-of-way.
Are you asking that to be sent to council?
Is this not going to council?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
But you're-
I want that clarified. I had to have that. I'm going to
Yep.
speak strongly about this, and I also, I'll speak. Thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I just wanted to go back to the graphic content on the signs. This was obviously, appreciate former Councillor Doucette coming down, and I know former Councillor Davis did a lot of work on this as well. And it's something that my residents in Beaches East York have been following. We've received correspondence on this in particular as well. So when I looked at the report, the response kind of just says that we're only able to regulate the locations of signs under Chapter 743. Have we gotten any advice or input on what regulating the content of the signs or print materials that are sent to people's homes?
I'll start with that, and if legal wants to jump in. We don't, again, we don't have authority to regulate what is, as a city perspective, of what is put as a flyer, as any type of promotional material. It's beyond our jurisdiction.
And you're saying that's an advocacy sign.
Okay, I don't know if legal wanted to jump in on that, but I guess, did we get a legal opinion or input on whether this matter would need provincial changes or what that would look like? Oh, there you are, sorry.
I believe, as the report indicates, there has been work done on educating homeowners how they can use the Trespassed Property Act themselves to prevent the delivery of these materials.
So there's been work done. Did we, like, as a city, did we do we just replied to some emails, or did we do a campaign on this? Has there been awareness?
The city has not been directly involved in that, but it has been taken up by various groups to be able to let the homeowners know what they are able to do, both vis-a-vis Canada Post and under the Trespassed Property Act.
Okay, so this was a 2018 members motion, as I understand. Over the past year, have we had any, so we're limited jurisdictionally in a number of different ways right now by virtue of being the municipality. Have we had any conversations or explored that with the province or expressed our concerns where we're at in our ability to regulate any of these things?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So we've been researching this. It is something we're going to have to look at from a number of angles. It's a very complex issue. It seems simple. It is not.
Right.
So we need to work with our partners in the various jurisdictions to understand from an advertising perspective, from a postage delivery perspective on what we can do and what we can't.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have a couple of questions. So the first one is with regards to the 2.1 meter clearance for the A signs. Did you not include a measurement clearance because of the variety of sidewalks that we have, or why wouldn't we want to have that in?
So the 2.1 is consistent with the work we just did in the spring around patios and marketing displays, and then on larger streets, 2.5. But then on smaller streets, there's also, I believe it's 1.8 is the, 2.1 for the smaller streets, sorry.
So that is the standard?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, and with regards to the fees for the open houses, I mean, the industry said that they would support tougher fees. Have we increased the fees? What are the fees like today? The penalties?
We have not increased the fees. The part of the penalty in a realtor's case would be if we're removing their signs in this new, we're able to take them away if you have more than 6. There's a cost to those signs, so there'd be that, and then there is also a fine. I think it's around $100.
And why haven't we looked at increasing that?
Legal can chime in on this piece. Thanks, Lisa.
The fees apart, the fines apart from the fees to do with removal have been increased. They are now in line with our newer bylaws, like the apartments bylaw and the other ones.
So can you let me know what the fees are?
Exercise our authority. Just give me one moment to flick to switch to that. So the maximum fine is now $100,000. Of course, that's upon conviction, and it is a justice of the peace who decides that, but it has been increased significantly.
It's $100,000?
That's the maximum.
And how do we go about charging somebody $100,000? So somebody has 20 signs up the street.
No, so a charge would be laid. It would be what's called a Part 3 charge and information. There would be either a guilty plea or trial, and a submission would be made as to fines. For a first offense, it would not be anywhere near that, but it has to be a deterrent, and then it would go up progressively if the person refused to comply.
And we charge $100 to remove every sign?
I'll have to defer to MLS for the fees.
If passed, yes, that's what we will be doing.
And why can't we increase that more?
Fines are set fines, and they have to be, you apply to have the amount, and again, it's what is reasonable determined by another level.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Speakers? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. I have a motion that I'd like to just put on the screen, if clerks could put that up there. Basically, as we've heard from the discussion here, I think there's really a need to improve our regulation on graphic images. And on page 24 of the report, the staff were talking about the challenges regulating these images, and I want to thank them for their work on that. As Carlton just described, this is a really complicated issue. And I think that there's still areas where we can explore this further, and that's the work that they're going to be coming back and doing anyway. So this motion is just formalizing that commitment. And then the second part of the motion is really intended to look at the regulatory mechanisms such as citizen enforcement. I gather a number of us got emails from the folks at WAPTO that's describing right-of-way clearance and citizen enforcement, the work that's being done in Mississauga right now and other jurisdictions, where there is the authority to remove nuisance signs if they enter into an agreement which includes clear criteria to define what that enforcement looks like. I think it's a model that really builds on community-led change, and certainly based on the number of correspondence that we all get on this on a regular basis, there's a lot of interest in that. So I hope this motion will build on the work that staff has been doing and continues to do with some extra detail and support to make our policies more enforceable. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Burke, do you have questions of them?
Yes.
Burks.
So can you point to me where in law it's defined what is and isn't a graphic image?
Can I?
Yeah.
No, I cannot do that.
Do you think there are people in Canada who would say that an image of a man kissing a man was graphic and offensive to them? Are there people like that in Canada?
Probably, yeah.
Yes. Are there people in Canada who might say that someone wearing a religious symbol is offensive to them?
Well, if the point that you're trying to make is that there's an element of subjectivity, I think that there's a lot of bylaws actually that have elements of subjectivity.
Very good.
And what we're doing.
So then, given that you're saying that it should be at that we should give discretionary powers of the bylaw enforcement staff, so you're saying effectively that our frontline staff will be in the position of deciding what is and is not offensive or hate speech. That's what you want to do with this motion.
I think there's a potential for that.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, the motion, if you read it, and I apologize that you didn't get a chance to look at it before, is asking staff to look at a strategy for this. So that's what we're doing. That's what I anticipate they'll come back with. Maybe they'll say it's impossible, Councillor Perks. Maybe that's what they'll say, but I'd like to give them the opportunity, given the correspondence and the interest expressed by residents across the city. I think that they should provide us with that information.
Any other questions? No. To speak, Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have a motion, and I would ask the clerks to put that on screen, and they have. Thank you. I want to direct all the comments and the presentations provided by the deputants today, as well as the communications we received. Ask staff to actually to review all of that and provide some further recommendations to the City Council, especially with respect to trying to increase greater accessibility on the public right-of-way. How do we pursue beautiful streets objectives, and whether or not we should be reducing or further eliminating third-party advertising on public property, as well as eliminating and reducing advocacy signs on private property, public sidewalks, boulevards, and right-of-ways. I want to thank staff for this work. I know that it's not necessarily easy to do bylaw review. I think every time you go out and talk to the public, you get a million different perspectives, and you're trying to create the balance. I have some great concerns about the opportunity to place advocacy signs on private property, and even the way we are not able to enforce as well as much as we want to. Our enforcement system is not proactive, so constantly we're going out to respond to complaints, and I suspect what we will see, because we're now permitting signs to go 2 meters above grade. So that's taller than myself. A sign that will then be about 1.2 square meters in size. You're actually permitting people to put billboards onto private property. And I think that what we've seen on university campuses and public spaces is that they oftentimes sit just about everywhere. So I have some concerns that we're actually creating a loophole that actually then allows for this to then proliferate across cities and neighborhoods. And I think that because we are not even doing a great job at proactive enforcement, I think we're going to have a real hard time once we open the gates getting in front of this afterwards. And some of the signs that we would see as subjective could just be really pushing the boundary of what is discriminatory and hateful. We've always seen lots of graphic images that was displayed by Councillor Doucette, and she's right to not show us those images again. But those images being distributed in a pamphlet is very different than being promoted by way of billboard size A-frames, or perhaps even billboards actually now permitted onto private property by way of creating this advocacy category. And I've also seen signs in the city, depending on which part of the city you travel on, where signs have actually been very offensive. Signs have had anti-immigration messages that have spread misinformation. The signs that actually take wrong tabloid-style articles and publish and made big into billboard size and sort of popped up into communities. And the signs are then weathered after many years, and from what I can tell, nobody takes them down. We have seen signs that are all about proselytizing, signs that have displayed racist symbols and imagery that speaks to an era that we want to no longer be associated with, signs that have anti-Semitic connections, and it just goes on. I mean, so yes, we have seen the no jet TO signs, and yes, we've seen the slow down signs, but I don't necessarily believe that that's the best way to convey a message to start off with. But at the same time, opening up this new category that allows people to put a sign that's 1.2 square meters in size, much bigger than the slow down signs, much bigger than any of the teal jet signs I've ever seen, and they can go up to 2 meters above grade, I think we are asking for a lot of trouble. So please take another look at that and then report back to us as City Council directly and see if there's a way for us to address the desire for the public to communicate, but at the same time not obliterate our beautiful streets policies and objectives, and not open up the door where we actually are debating everything on everybody's doorsteps about, things that are anti-immigration, it's just like, I think you know where I'm going. Thank you very much. If you can do this work, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I'm going to really support you, because you could turn your whole private front lawn into a large billboard. And as we know, signs are very contentious in the city. And we could be called, Paris is called the City of Lights. We could be called the City of Signs, because the sign lobby is so amazing. And there's the biggest sign I've ever seen up by St. Clair. I have no idea how it ever got there. It is the largest sign in the city, and that's just an aside. I want to support your motion. I want to amend Councillor Bradford's, because I think the graphic images that we're talking about, really, abortion is a medical procedure. If you had pictures up of people having their hips cut open and chainsaws and everything that they go in to do all those procedures, it would be pretty bad too. So I just think that people need to not see bloody images in the city. So staff should look at it with that lens. It's not a religious issue. It's not a philosophical issue. It's actually a medical procedure. So I want to be really clear with that, which is why I think we should look carefully at what we can do. If there were big pictures that said stop heart transplants and showed what you look like with your chest all opened up and all the blood and the gore and everything else, I think people would be doctors would be saying, get that off of there, etc. So that's the first thing. So I would like to do that. And then I just want to talk about this right-of-way issue one more time. And I have to say, I'm just so disappointed. I'm dreadfully disappointed that we keep getting this back here. We keep getting it back here. There's little streets like Lewis Street in my ward, old cottages. They don't have any private property. They have the right-of-way right up to their porch. So while somebody in another part of town has a huge lawn, could put anything up, now we're telling those people, you can't put anything up. You can't put a slow down sign, you can't put a cuts hurt kids sign, you can't put any sign up on that lawn because it doesn't belong to you. So I think if we're going to do that, what we really need to say is, okay, then you are going to cut the grass, you're going to do the garden, return that right back over to the city. If you say that nothing, we can't plant a flower there, we can't do anything on that, then the city should maintain that. And I might just have to move that at council, because that's really the corollary of saying you can't put a sign on the right-of-way. Say, okay, then here you go. You don't clear my snow, but you're going to have to mow my lawn. You're going to have to water the plants. You're going to have to make sure that everything's good on that right-of-way, because you're basically telling me I have no responsibility over it. That's what the conclusion I'm drawing. And I'm so tired of this discrimination that ends up with these little lawns, little places, small neighborhoods, can't put up your sign, can't have your street, your sidewalk cleared. It just goes on and on and on, because the city, as we know it now, the preponderance of properties have a right-of-way that doesn't affect anything else you do on your property. But in the majority of downtown, it has. In the old city of Toronto, it has a big effect. Your little Wellesley cottages, they probably have a little strip there. That's right. Well, guess what? They don't own that. Can't put anything up. It's just silly. And I don't understand why we can't have a lens that kind of recognizes the different parts of the city of Toronto. It is so frustrating this many years, 22 years later, after amalgamation, 22 years, that we are not able to say, well, different things happen in different ways in the City of Toronto. And so you've heard my little tantrum there.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Councillor Perks.
Oh, I just have one other thing to say. As far as these graphic images signs that go up on lawns, I don't think there's anybody's neighborhood where that would be up more than, well, the start of one night. They will come down. It's people standing with those signs on the street and harassing people that become the problem.
Councillor Perks.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford's motion, I really, really, really struggle with this issue. And we've all struggled with it. Councillor Doucette will remember when we were discussing it last term. It was a hard conversation for all of us. I think we should be looking at what we can do to inform the public about how to stop people from delivering this stuff to your front door. I think we should be looking at how to make sure that sidewalks aren't blocked. I think we should be doing what we can to empower people so that they're not getting harassed by protesters on the streets who are actually aggressive and so on, and giving people tools to deal with all of that. These are all important things for municipal governments to do. I can't get myself there, though, that we should be asking our our frontline bylaw enforcement officers to be making a decision about what does and does not constitute free speech on city sidewalks. It puts them at risk, giving them the responsibility to sort through one of the most complex problems in a democratic society that I think is unfair, because we can't give them decent guidelines without, frankly, without some kind of guidance from the Supreme Court of Canada, as to whether or not these anti-abortion messages constitute hate speech. Until I know that, I don't think it's fair to put our frontline staff in the position of having to monitor that. I also, maybe it's because I'm a little older, but I can remember a time when control of speech was a way of disciplining people in minorities and keeping them out of mainstream culture. And I just live in fear that if we overreach here, we create the conditions where, once again, people who are not, in the norm or in the majority get silenced. So I just can't go there on Councillor Bradford's motion. I agree with what Sarah said during her deputation, that we have to find tools to help deal with this, but putting city staff in the position of trying to regulate speech without guidance is just, it's a step too far for me.
Thank you. Okay. I will say a few words. I want to start with Councillor Bradford's motion. And I do share some of the concerns that Councillor Perks is actually talking about. I do think that having frontline staff making those kinds of decisions it's concerning. I think that we will be putting people, our staff, at risk. But I do believe that as a city we have to find a way to enforce the use of these signs. With regards to Councillor Wong Tam, I'll also be supporting that motion because I am concerned with the loophole that we're going to be creating and having signs everywhere. I do want to touch upon the open house signage and the condo signs, and I don't know if any of you have had to deal with a bad apple. And fortunately, it is bad apples. There's 55,000 members that are part of the real estate board, and I'm happy to see them here wanting to work with the city to deal with these bad apples that we have. But it's been extremely frustrating, and I know that Councillor Robinson has been another councillor that has been trying to deal with this. When real estate agents actually use open house signs to be marketing signs, and they just plaster entire neighborhoods with these signs all over the place, and it's intersection after intersection after intersection, sometimes for the whole week of these signs. And it's very frustrating to see this in a hot housing market like it is today, to have these kinds of tactics in our neighborhoods. It's not acceptable. So I am really happy to see the real estate board taking action with us on this. I think it's something that we need to deal with. I was ready to just get rid of these signs, to be honest with you, and it was because of the commitment, I think, from the board, and I think the frustration that they also share with a lot of us, and the commitment to deal with this, that I think we need to see how this is going, have this back in a year, evaluated, and really hopefully brag about all the progress that we've made and deal with in dealing with these bad apples that we have. I think that there's a place to open house signs. I think people value them when done appropriately. I think that that's the way that we have to go about it. But I think it's really important to deal with these. There's no reason why the city, honestly, should be sending MLS officers to have to deal with this, to be honest with you. I think there's way too many things out there that you know, we need to be working on. There's no need to have real estate or developers plastering entire neighborhoods with these signs, making it unsafe for people to walk our sidewalks with the housing market that we have out there. I think business is booming, and I think we need to keep that in mind. So I will be looking forward to have the report back in a year, and hopefully the situation to be solved. So hopefully I can get your support for that. And with that, I think we're ready to vote on the different motions. What's the first one?
First one is the amendment.
So amendment to Councillor Bradford, is it a friendly amendment? It is a friendly amendment. Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll integrate it into Councillor Bradford's motion.
Okay. Okay, so Councillor Bradford's motion, all those in favor? Oh, you want to, okay. So Councillor Fletcher's amendment. Okay. In particular of medical procedures. To add that to Councillor Bradford's, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So sorry. No. I just want to make sure that, are we voting on A?
We're voting on A, the changes to A. So Councillor Fletcher's.
Are we voting on the changes to A, or are we voting on A as it is?
The changes to A. Well, no, they asked for two separate, so.
I think that when the councillor said separate, she meant A and B, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Just wanted, I could feel that there was a disconnect. Okay. Let's try that again. So 1A with the friendly amendment from Councillor Fletcher. Okay, 1A with the friendly amendment from Councillor Fletcher. All those in favor? That carries. 1B. You want to record it? Okay, all those against? And that carries. 1B, all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Okay, next motion. Councillor Wong Tam, all those in favor? That, all those against? That carries. And Councillor, my motion, right? All those in favor? All those against? That carries. Item is amended. All those in favor? That carries. Okay, item 9.4, focusing on building design improvements. Jeff Cattell, our first speaker. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Chair Baleo, and interesting morning. By the way, my name is Jeff Cattell. I'm co-chair of the Federation of North Toronto Resident Associations. My co-chair, Kathy McDonald, wasn't able to make it. We did also, commenting on this item, but we also commented on the PPS, the Provincial Policy Statement, and would like to congratulate staff for an excellent analysis and recommendations in that regard for that item. This item concerns a letter from the Mayor. It's called Focusing on Building Design Improvements. And we wish to provide comments and recommendations to the committee in regard to the Mayor's proposed directions for building design improvements. The letter presents a summary and 5 recommendations, unsupported by a staff report, and without any analysis of issues leading to the recommendations. Apparently, the recommendations emanate from a meeting held this summer with quote-unquote international talent from the development, architectural, and planning communities. The lesson from the meeting was that, quote, we must consider design in our policy development and procurement and employ open and transparent competitions whenever possible. That sounds fine as far as it goes. We all agree that good design is a necessary condition to create a quote-unquote a beautiful and engaging city. It is not, however, a sufficient condition. Buildings exist in a context, in a community. Individual building design needs to consider the physical, the cultural, the architectural context, and how the building will relate to and improve the surrounding community. The lack of this focus in the deliberations of the city's design review panel is its fundamental flaw. Another is the lack of public input to the panel's considerations. For example, the design review panel agreed that the proposed 48-story development at 1 Delisle Avenue, that's Yonge and St. Clair, was good design based on how it looked from Yonge and Davisville. While the design has some great features, the local context at St. Clair matters. Importantly, should we be in fact bringing the customary heights from an urban growth center like Yonge and Eglinton to a lesser node? The panel did not consider this or hear from local residents. On the one hand, it seems that the city wants to focus on public design competitions for neighborhoods. Yet on the other hand, residents are still waiting for the neighborhood design guidelines that were promised by city planning 3 years ago. The idea was to develop guidelines for 2 neighborhoods, for Long Branch and Willowdale, and then create a template that could be adopted in neighborhoods across the city. So what has happened? Well, the Long Branch guidelines were developed, they were adopted by council, and they've been implemented. Hallelujah. The Willowdale guidelines are, well, who knows? We don't seem to get any answers to that. So where is the template? Time has passed. Without these enforceable guidelines, developers will continue to act with impunity with scant regard to neighborhood character. Another example of the lack of attention to context is the city's Committee of Adjustment, which accepts applications for quote-unquote minor variances, which frequently contemplate demolition of the existing dwelling and replacement with one much larger, without requiring an elevation drawing that shows the building at correct scale in relation to the adjacent buildings. Consequently, neighbors have no idea how the building will line up or fit in with their homes. Therefore, in addition to Mayor Tory's 5 recommendations, which are fine as they are, but we request that the Planning and Housing Committee recommend that City Council direct the Chief Planner and Executive Director City Planning Division to do 3 things. One is to request the Design Review Panel to consider context and to provide for public input as part of its design considerations. Secondly, to complete the neighborhood design guidelines template and expedite its submission to City Council for approval. Thirdly, to amend Committee of Adjustment application requirements to include submission of elevation drawings, front elevation, identifying the subject property in the context of the neighboring properties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Seeing none. Thanks, Jeff. We have one more person, Kathy McDonald, to speak.
She's, as I said, she's not present.
Okay. Thank you.
We're co-chairs.
Great. Thank you so much. Questions of staff? I do have a question. Chief Planner, could you please comment on the recommendations that Fontra just asked us to move?
Yes, through the chair. The request for the design review panel to consider context and provide public input as part of its design considerations. I just offer that the committee is aware that the design review panel is but one input into the planning process. It is officially advice to the chief planner, and that input is considered as staff evaluate the application, together with other information that is gathered at community meetings, for example, or working groups. So it is odd in a way that the design review panel would be altered to take in public input as well. I would say it happened, but in a complementary manner with the community process. I would offer that the design review panel does consider context, but they consider context through their own lens, which, as everyone is entitled to do, they're design professionals that are appointed by City Council. So the second comment about the neighborhood design guidelines template, we have, as indicated by Mr. Cattell, have completed Long Branch. We are in the process of completing Willowdale, and we will be posting that template soon. I'm hopeful in the next 6 months or so, or maybe less. And that work is continuing. It is a difficult piece of work because, as Mr. Cattell knows, we are using the design guidelines template as a way for communities to identify key components of neighborhood character, but they are not zoning bylaw amendments. So we're using them as a tool to influence change rather than to regulate change. Thirdly, the Committee of Adjustment application requirements. We do require elevation drawings for the subject property. Mr. Cattell's letter indicates that the neighboring property should be also included in those drawings. I checked with staff this morning about this, and they observed that often we do get this information, but we don't require it. And Mr. Cattell's pointing out that it is difficult to judge sometimes if you don't have the neighboring properties. It's something that we have not required. It's an additional piece of information that isn't always available to local, in a local context to architects or to homeowners who want to deal with their property. So I would suggest that it would be difficult to make it a standard part of the application. I think we can continue to try to encourage ways for that information to be brought before committee when that's relevant to their consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none. Speakers? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I really would like to just thank staff for their work on bringing this together, and the mayor's office and deputy mayor Bylaw. When we have city assets, whether those are our Create TO sites, libraries, things in the public realm, I think that there's historically been a lot more that we could do as a city to show leadership on those fronts when it comes to raising the bar on urban design. That is really what this letter is about, and the intention to do that. When we are investing in sites, when we're working in partnership with other agencies and divisions and public and private sector, I think there's been historically a missed opportunity to fully leverage those. And it's, particularly when we're talking about create TO sites, it's not just about how much housing we can add, but what can we add to the community. And I think, to Mr. Catel's point, the DRP is one input, and particularly recommendations 4 and 5 are really looking, as the design review panel has been around for a number of years, how can we improve that process and still use it as an important input to make sure that we're achieving design objectives that actually enhance the public realm, actually improve iterations of the projects that are coming forward. When we have these sites, and we have 11 now, we will soon have more going forward, it is an opportunity for us to provide additive benefit to the community that goes above and beyond housing, but also enhances the public realm, enhances our communities, makes our neighborhoods better. That is really the intent of these recommendations here in this letter and the conversation that we had with design experts this summer. I think that when we look at projects like the Etobicoke Civic Center, or even like City Hall that we're in today, obviously an iconic piece of architecture here in Toronto, those have been the genesis of a design competition. So, this is not a pioneering effort across the board. Certainly there are other jurisdictions that have taken this approach, but we're doing it today now in Toronto, and this letter and these recommendations forward coming from this committee really lay the groundwork for that. So I'm excited to hear what staff comes back with. The missing middle in all of those conversations are increasingly important as we look to add that gentle density in our neighborhoods. And let's go out to the design community. Let's go out to different folks and see what kind of ideas they can come up with and bring to Toronto and bring to our neighborhoods. I, for one, am excited to see that. I think that housing can be a positive thing, and I think that this really pushes us to innovate and raise the bar on design. It's something I'm looking forward to. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to save my comments because I'm going to try to see if we can actually finish this agenda by lunch. So, all those in favor? Against, seeing none, that carries. Okay. And so now, which item is this? He had a motion. No. You had a motion, Brad? Oh, no. No. Yeah. So this one is good. So next item. So item number 5, which was an item that Councillor Layton and I asked to be introduced on the Laneway strategy. Can I get a vote on that? All those in favor? Yeah. Oh, and I had a slight amendment that the chief planner recommended on the language. So what is underlined? And that's why the chief planner asked us to. But it's the planning of how to use the laneways, right? It's a strategy. All right. Yeah, we'll start here and then it'll go all over. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, that carries. Next item. It's an item about live music venues. If I could ask for your support to get this work initialized. All those in favor? That carries. And third item that was introduced and that I asked for your support was an item introduced by Councillor Fletcher. And can we vote? Yep. Okay, all those in favor? And that carries. Okay, so we're now back to item 9.2. And before we go in camera, I need to make sure that I ask the question that is actually going to lead us to go in camera, because I don't think staff can answer this properly, which is to provide us an update on the hearing for the OPA 231. So I believe that we need to go in camera for that. This is to set it. Yep. And so, two reasons. So one is an update in the hearing, and the other one, broadly advised that might have.
There you go.
There we go.
It's like you read my mind.
Oh, my God.
So if I could have all those in favor? And that carries. Okay. So we just need Okay, we're back in public session. Any speakers on this item? Seeing none. Councillor Bradford?
Yeah, I just have a quick motion to move. It's small, but it just is really building off of item 9.4, which was the letter regarding design recommendations. I would like to, and the motion we can put on the screen, is that we ask city planning to include in the work plan as they report back on the MCR. There's 4 categories, the last being environmental, as part of the conformity exercise relating to improved design standards under policy area 4. So I'd like to incorporate that. I had a chance to chat with our chief planner about that, and he's on board with it, so I'd appreciate your support.
Thank you. And I, too, also have a motion. It was circulated through the communications that we had with a letter from Councillor Nunziata and I. If I could ask your support, it'd be greatly appreciated. And can we move them out as a package, or? Yeah, okay. All those in favor? And that carries. Okay, item as amended. All those in favor? That carries. Great. Thank you, and we're adjourned, right? Great, thank you. Adjourn. Before lunch. Yes.